before we start, I just want to give a bit of a background to Piers, why Pier is doing this and how our relationship with Simon has developed. We began the conversation with Simon, I suppose, last summer, when he invited us to partner him in the production of this wonderful idea for a book involving 51 artists that he'd invited to contribute a piece of writing, either their own or a found text, to this project. Over time, we were very pleased to participate in this as a host venue for the book, the celebratory launch of the book, and the performance, which of all of the text to be read by an artist. In this case, it was Alastair Mackenzie was identified, and he's recorded the work. As the time progressed and it became evident that there was going to be yet another lockdown, we had a conversation, decided that we would like to reconfigure this project for another iteration, and to use the public face of Pier to bring the work directly onto the street. And that's the manifestation that you can see in these images. It was very exciting to work with Simon in this way, and it was the third time that Pier's had an opportunity to use the physicality of the gallery and its relationship to the street in this way. Earlier in the year, we'd done a bold graphic on the windows that referenced Pier and the local area's relationship with Shakespeare, which was, and The Tempest. And then more recently, we did a project with Sabine de Bois, who treated the gallery space as a kind of vitrine that people could look into the gallery and see an installation, as well as see work, a film commission that was projected onto the gallery. So this is a kind of third iteration. I don't want to say any more about that at the moment, because that will, I think, come out further in the conversation. But I'd quite like to just now show you a very short clip of the Alastair Mackenzie performance of the work. And then from there, we can start our conversation.
There is no sound.
Crude as flippant resistance, redundancy stylized, curbed enthusiasm. When paper falls, representation fails, read inadequate surfaces. Is actually Lame really lame? Gathering momentum perhaps only to refresh a libidinous powerlessness, arousing, sparkling, little trash. Vulnerability is not weakness. A frail body may have sharp bones. This underperforming text is a measure of how convoluted this situation could become were you let it unfurl. Trompe l'oeil as trompe la mort. Roll, sit, fetch, the image won't be tamed. Triumphant in the dirt, hear its lament, nor lame, nor lame. It is from a distance that you hear sounds, your own voice perhaps, locked and unuttered, stored in the memory of the recording. You keep on waiting for your turn to be heard. The voice comes back not as your own anymore, but as magnetically compressed evidence, haunting with its newly attained authority. To speak is to question the will to possess. To speak means to reaffirm a presence, to be noticed, to gain control. Technology presents us with a promise of record keeping, retaining what is no longer as a privilege of truth. In an audio recording, the voice belongs to someone who cannot be seen, whose presence is asserted only through sound. Self-muting offers a pleasure of letting everyone else be heard. Our attention is fixed on listening to what was then, now. Forget everything to learn again. Our conversation needs no stage. A recording while keeping time also keeps a trace of her tongue. Freed from the oppression of chronology, she insists of never reaching the end. Rewind, loop, edit, It's not the voice commanding the story, it is the ear.
So here are some of the page spreads of the book. This is Jimmy's spread, and the next one is Marysia's. And we also want to share with you some of the designs of the cover, just to give you a sense of how the book will look. It will be released in the next couple of months. As you can see, we're still making decisions about colours, but which is a very exciting and wonderful process. And I hope that Kirsty and Simon can talk about that as well, their collaboration. So I think now I'd like to hand over to Louisa, and hope this is all going well. Oh, I'm sorry, I thought I was, oh, no, okay.
You're there.
I'm here. Okay, thank you, Louisa, and we'll see you later.
Okay, thanks very much, Ingrid. I hope everybody can hear me okay. So what we saw then was this wonderful kind of multi-layered approach, because we both heard Jimmy and Marysia's texts, we then saw them on the window, and we then saw them on the pages of the book. And I love the kind of multi-strandedness of this project and the way that it actually began initially with Simon, didn't it, as a performance and the launch of a book, and the last stage of it is the stage that we actually encounter first now with the exhibition, which is of course the great glass window with the collage text on it. So could you just talk a little bit about the kind of genesis of this idea and how you came to conceive it, and these wonderful kind of strands and elements that came in different orders at different times?
So I wanted to do an exhibition to be performed for some time, because I'm very interested in the idea of exploring what different exhibition structures, what can be an exhibition, a book as an exhibition, a video as an exhibition. And obviously the first lockdown last year, suddenly I had the time and the kind of, it just seemed like the appropriate moment to do it, because also there's something really freeing about doing a project which doesn't rely necessarily on one site, one space, you know, physically. So the way it was born is that I invited the artists and I put together the script with all the amazing contribution that I received. And so my first idea was to then do the performance with the actor performing the work as one take, so as one voice. And to basically have that online as an exhibition. Then I realized that, well, from the beginning I thought, because the core of the project is the text, the different manifestations of the text are really exciting, different ways of communicating this exhibition. So I always had in mind that the project was going to have this kind of shape-shifting quality. And again, that's another kind of freeing element about this, you know, that it allowed me to explore even the idea of doing an exhibition in 3 or more platforms, for example. So then I came up with the idea of the book, because I thought it would be an amazing book, and I like making books and I like exhibition as books. And then of course, when I started the conversation with Pierre, which has been a wonderful partner in the project, and then with the most recent lockdown, there was the opportunity to do the window. It seemed like a perfect way to do another iteration of the project. I already thought about, you know, using text, vinyl text and graphics of all the texts in a gallery space, because, you know, for example, I like the fact that it will keep changing and growing. There will be other versions. Even the video of Alastair, we could show in a museum or in a gallery later on. So it's also a kind of itinerant exhibition, as well as being a kind of shape-shifting project. So yeah, that's how it came about.
I mean, I think it's very interesting that the texts are found texts, or they're created by the participants. there are many different forms of text. One is just a single musical note. I mean, it's a very various sort of smorgasbord of responses. And Kirsty, your response to it is so crucial, because the elements that we receive on the pages of the book that we've seen and also on the windows have to respond very much to the kind of spirit of the text, to your interpretation of how it plays visually. You've given it this really wonderful look, and to make it into a coherent whole that's also distinct with its parts. Were you, Simon and Kirsty, working very closely together, or did you kind of really give it your own interpretation? Kirsty, how did the dynamic between the two of you work?
Well, Simon and I have worked together for many years now on various different projects, so we know each other very well, which is always good, because when you it's a complex project because it's a group show that doesn't have like artwork to show. So you as the designer are producing the sort of end result of it. You're contributing to the artwork, whereas normally you're laying out and presenting artwork. And I think that was what was quite interesting, being asked to be part of the panel discussion, is that rarely as the designer do you are ever put on this kind of platform to talk about how you end up manifesting something. And I think
it's unfair, actually, given that the design is so crucial to so many art shows. I mean, of course, the artwork's there, but here you've become part of the artwork. But the designer, so often you are kind of relegated, to the sidelines, when actually you have a crucial role throughout, it seems to me.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I think in this particular project, more than ever, the graphic design ends up as the book as well as the window. I mean, of course, the text is, but I think but in other group shows, you always have the challenge of trying to represent a large body of people in one coherent way. And I think that's really challenging, to try and get the personality of each individual artist across, as well as make it feel like a visual, that it makes sense. So you're creating like an identity and a sort of feeling for a particular project. And I think Simon, we work very well together in the way that Simon's, he had already formed the script, because he had formed the script for Alastair. And then we'd begun ideas for the book, but we hadn't quite designed the book yet. We'd talked about it and had discussions about what it would be like. And I think we even discussed at one point a limited edition to try and raise funds to make the book. And then suddenly the window idea came about. And I knew that I wouldn't be able to start with the window. It was too hard. So we sort of rearranged the studio's program of what we were doing in terms of projects, and quickly had to design the inside of the book. Because I think it was really important to look at every single contribution and sort of imagine it in a sort of square some artists have 2 pages because it's a longer contribution, as well as other artists have a page. Because also as a designer, you've also always got production costs in mind. So you're having to keep, you're having these practical constraints, as well as consideration constraints of how much you give to one artist and give to another artist. And there's all these kind of, balances you're weighing up. And I think I wanted to go into those artists' worlds and really understand their practice, what they do, what they're saying in the text. But then I also did set myself some rules about, we only use one typeface, except for when the artist was very sure about the typeface they wanted to use, because it was part of the artwork.
Christian Marclay, for example. Yeah.
Yes. And there is Christian's is very visual, but there was also other artists where it's a big part of their practice that they only ever use one typeface. And then interestingly, there were some artists that do that, but then in this context decided to remove those constraints. So there's artists we know that only generally use particular typefaces in their work, but in this context, they were okay with letting it go, but others weren't. And I think that was all very interesting, that play off of how, and then moving on to the window, by that stage, we designed the inside of the book. And then you've got a new challenge that the inside of the book's got a very, page 1 to the end, the start and finish. Whereas a window, anyone could interpret those texts in a different way. So then we came back to like Simon's feeling about suddenly his is undone because someone could interpret that window and start reading the last window first. So it was kind of then going back to like, Simon said, well, obviously it would be nice to guide someone in a way. So it's sort of very loosely base itself around the script, but because everybody's interpreting it in one window, it didn't matter so much. So then design needed to kind of become the most important thing, where it needed to feel balanced with all the contributions.
So it's a lot of plates to spin here, and also a leap of faith for the artists themselves to give their work over and have it expressed visually. And both of you, Marysia and Jimmy, both use text a lot in your work, and it's a very central part of what you do in your practice. And Marysia, I wanted just to ask you first of all, then I'll ask Jimmy. Really, how did you feel? What was your response when you were approached by Simon to take part in this project? And what are your feelings about it and how you've participated in the way in which your text now does manifest itself in these different ways, on glass, on paper, and in a live performance? I think you're muted.
I was interested in the invitation itself, how Simon made the first approach, because it was very clear that it is his artwork and that he was acting as a curator, but he really is an artist. So here, this double role of artist as curator, which is also a role that I have adopted many times, where I would use curatorial tactics, but I would never call myself a curator. So these rules were attractive to me because they were also offering some kind of reflection on what's happening now. At the same time, the idea of togetherness is very difficult to picture. And that he was offering something where I could kind of give up control and yet be very comfortable, and sort of give him a benefit of the doubt. Whether
you said that you were very happy when we had a preliminary chat about the company that you were keeping. It was the lineup of the artists, the kind of the other people, the other participants were a factor in making you feel very at ease with this project. You did teach, I have to say, both Jimmy and Simon as well, so that may be an element.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, that was a long time ago, especially with Simon. But I think it was just very reassuring that the function of the artist is also to create this kind of community. Because in the current state where, I feel the gallery is orphaned because it hasn't got its own community, the visitors. We as artists are orphaned, we don't see each other. So here was an opportunity where, all these people that, when I looked at the list, are pretty much a sort of, a history of my practice and of me living in London for the last 30 years, that really felt like, there is a collective here, which is intuitive, but it's also quite specific why these people are together in this project.
And Jimmy, you have a very specific, as Ingrid touched on as well, relationship with Pierre. I mean, you did that fantastic performance piece, the European Portraits in 2017 in Pierre. You performed in that space. And also you had your texts on its walls. So there's a very kind of, multi-stranded relationship that you've already got with the space and that great window that gives straight onto the street. So you also approached all those different audiences that are now looking at your text in vinyl on the window and listening to Alastair performing your text as well. So that must have played a part in shaping your attitude, I think, towards this exhibition too, your very particular relationship with Pierre in many dimensions.
Yeah, actually the text, there was also a text on the window during the exhibition that I was interacting with during the performance and during the rehearsals. So the texts were on the walls, but also on the window. So there was already this desire to reach out to the street and kind of break down that barrier that the window could have been, or could have been seen at. And so, yeah, the performance was exploring in a way like the idea of text as portraits in a way, and then also maybe movement as portrait. And I was performing with a painting on the floor. And what was interesting was really how then I could then interact with the public at any time, but also, you know, there was this separation within the audience that was witnessing the performance indoors and people who would be passing by. So that was a very interesting kind of distance or kind of dynamic that was separating then. Also, I wanted to point out last time when we had this little introduction that I saw also some similarities in my text and the ones from Marysia, which was very interesting in terms of content, because the text I provided was initially a text I wanted to use as a press release for an exhibition, but you know, when artists write their own text as press release, the galleries never quite think the same way. So it ended up being a text that an object in the exhibition, and I was really interested in seeing how it would exist outside of like my reading of it or my interpretation of it. So it was really interesting to see then how it was fitting and how it was relating to the other text in the book, but also so exist by itself, but also hear it, because, you know, I've read it for myself, but I've never heard it read. So it was interesting to kind of put a voice to the text and see and witness how it could be read.
And this was a text for an earlier exhibition that was...
Yes, 2015, I think, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And Marysia, your text as well was adapted for this exhibition too. You didn't write it out of nowhere. It came from an earlier piece that you worked on.
Yeah, well, it came from sort of initial reflections that I was having while creating this project, the Women's Audio Archive. So very much aware of, you know, idea of traces and recording and voice as a political tool, and archive as a kind of generative space. And, you know, these are the tropes that I've been interested in. But also here, I think there is this other aspect that, you know, this idea of how you make it accessible. And I am very interested in, you know, how these different contexts also create different communities. So publishing is a form of making a public, and that public will be very different for the book, for the large glass in Hoxton, for Alastair's voice. And I think all these aspects, you know, I also reflect in the text. The text talks about trace and voice, and especially a female voice. And it talks about technology. And of course, that's another aspect of our reality now is, you know, this session is being recorded in order then to be made accessible to people who are not with us right now. And I really appreciate that.
Sorry to interrupt. It's just I wanted to mention something because you just mentioned it yourself. This idea of recording and also archiving in a way for the future was very much in my mind at the beginning when I thought about this project, because of what was going on with the first lockdown, everybody has to communicate the way we're doing now through, you know, computer apps. I just realized even more the importance of recording things and recording voices, and it seemed like such a charged moment historically, you know, between Brexit and the ecological crisis and the pandemic and Black Lives Matter and so much, you know, going on that seemed like a really important time to record what artists had to say. in this moment in time. And I did kind of feel like somehow this idea of also already archiving something for the future.
But I think it's interesting that when you sent the letter out, you didn't ask them, artists, to make any response to the moment, the time, the environment, Black Lives Matter, the pandemic, Brexit. It was just a piece of text that you would like to contribute. So it did give a snapshot of where people were at the time, but not making a kind of overt message about it. And also, I'm curious about your choice of artists. I mean, this project seems so much about communities, about audiences, but also the participants are each other's audience as well. And it's a network of communications and a network of people that you selected. You chose 51, probably slightly more. Maybe some people decided not to do it, but you made that list. So it's your artwork, your choice, and those interconnections and that community in a way forms this kind of composite piece. I was interested in your choice of participants.
Well, it was interesting for me because, again, in the first lockdown, it gave me, starting to work on this project, gave me the opportunity to connect with other friends and artists that I worked with in the past. It was a nice way to reconnect with them again, even though we're all going through the same thing in different parts of the world. And then to expand it further to new friends through their galleries. But to answer your question, I mean, overall, there was an idea of artists that work with text or performance. I mean, you know, I felt like I had to contain and structure this somehow, you know, and it just really made sense. And also in a way by asking those kind of artists that already work with text or performance, I felt like there would have been a kind of understanding or openness in what I was trying to do, because ultimately I was trying to do a work that is a collage of text, but also that comes alive when it's read out loud, you know, when it's performed. Also, what's really interesting is like, I just had such a variety of contributions. And I was very interested in how some were more specific about the pandemic, some weren't, some were more like interesting also conceptually in relation to the work itself, were more about authorship or about recording. So it just became a really interesting multi-view, multifaceted, you know, portrait maybe of this moment in time. And it's also like going back to what both Marysia and Jimmy were saying about portraiture is quite interesting, because I realized that it's also a kind of collective portrait.
And also, I think this kind of intimate space, this quietness, you know, this sense of it being very much about a text that people can engage with in a very particular and intimate way. I think Marysia talked about it beautifully, saying it was a kind of quiet intimacy. Although it's very public, it's also very private at the same time.
I think that the public aspect is important, because while the book is obviously something that is truly, you know, you kind of are with it in your own time, on your own, but in the street, it's a really amazing experience to just see people standing and reading and being visible to others while they're reading. So it's something that I mentioned, I think, also in our earlier conversation, that it kind of manifests a public intimacy, which, you know, on some level you could think it's a contradiction. But I think in these times, people are much more prepared to be publicly engaged. And I think the one other thing, Simon, to you, while you were talking, I was thinking how you manage not just to gather us as artists, not just to gather the texts, but actually to gather attention and to shift attention from what, you know, the art world is so obsessed with, which is collection, to collectivity. And I really appreciate that.
Yes, that's,
you know, I think the other interesting thing is that, you know, I think the artists responded to my invitation because I think also artists just love ideas, you know, and respect other artists' ideas from that point of view. And there's a kind of enthusiasm and solidarity that took place, because, you know, also when I first sent the initial invitation, there wasn't a plan of partnering with an art space. I didn't know yet if I could do a book or not. So the real kind of beginning was literally, let's make this text together and let's perform it, have someone performing it online, you know, as a video. So it was kind of interesting how then the whole project mushroomed. And it's kind of, again, quite freeing that it's just about wanting to do something, and also like working with the limitation of the lockdown and realizing that it could be something fruitful instead of just oppressive.
And Kirsty, while you were evolving the text, I mean, as you've talked earlier about this leap from the book from the page to the glass, if you like. I mean, this whole sense of this evolution, this changing and this shifting must have been something that was, you know, very dynamic and changeable, but also, you know, all credit to an organization like Peer that's small enough and nimble enough to be able to make this happen, to be able to change this format and allow things to shape shift in a way. But a challenge for you, particularly under lockdown as well.
I think also as well, there's like the practicalities of, I mean, even legibility. You know, we did quite a few tests on the illumination from the back light with the blinds down, whether the vinyl should be semi-opaque or whether it should be completely opaque. And then we talked a lot about that idea of how legible it could be. We didn't want, you know, it's that very fine balance in terms of production. Just, it's fine type. It took quite a few tests to understand that where it becomes beautiful and where it becomes ugly, where you start to see just reflections in the glass. And I think, Jimmy, you know, with your project, you know, there's so many things more you suddenly realize around that gallery, and the windows themselves, they've got a tint on the glass, how that affects. And I think Marysia's sort of kind of response of it as being very emotional and very peaceful, that's a very fine balance that you can throw very quickly if you don't do it, manifest it well. So going back to like how I feel a huge sense of responsibility on this amount of artists to, you know, to make sure that their work is and perceived as it should in its best light, if that makes sense.
No, that's really interesting. I mean, Jimmy, the way in which you meticulously choreographed your performance, the way in which you had the reflections of you within the mirrors within the space, but the reflections of you on the window and the reflections of the viewer on the outside, and this intimate sort of acquaintance with the architecture. I mean, projects like yours and also like Simon's make you very aware of your position and your place and your location and your body in a way. It's a very bodily piece, Simon's, in a way, even though it's a text piece.
Yeah, no, I think there's definitely also an aspect I'm interested in a way, in terms of how one does position themselves in relation to not only text, but images, art history, you know, everything is kind of implicated in terms of reading, because at the end of the day, we're talking about reading and writing, and these two activities are, you know, things that I found always interesting. And in terms of how much you involve yourself, how much you interpret things, how much you project onto, you know, text. And so somehow these various translations from text to image to body, to me, are kind of constant translations of like interpretation or textures or surfaces in a way. So that's why, you know, texts are on windows, and then kind of trying to kind of point out also the kind of porosity maybe of text, both text and images through whether it's paper or glass, and how, you know, one can maybe almost, you know, touch the words and have this kind of intimacy with them.
I mean, that's something that your work's so involved with, Marissa, too, this notion of the many modes of words, the many resonances of words, the histories of words, the politics of words. You know, this it seems to chime so strongly between the two of you.
Oh, yeah, I also think that in this chain of making considerations of, you know, what is the moment, what are the relationships? And, you know, this, when Simon was trying to tell you why he invited these artists, I think I really felt that, you know, once you have a relationship within, well, your creative practice, it is so amazing how much it generates and how much it, even though we haven't spoken for many years, when that voice comes back to you, there is already so much to say to each other. So I think, you know, that moment of Simon actually generating the relationships and generating the relationships, not just between the artists, also this, you know, this whole structure of the gallery, of Kirsty, of now this discussion of Alastair, you know, that's a whole kind of ecosystem. And that is the ecosystem that makes the artwork. The artwork is not the text alone. And I think this is such a nice, for me, it's such a great moment where you can see that it's the context. It is those relationships that make this work. And it's wonderful to give up some of the control that normally is associated with a single artist, with a single work. And it just works beautifully here.
In the sense also that it goes out into the future. I mean, another key part of Simon's letter that you said was, you know, that you wanted to see as a testament for the future. You put in your first paragraph, and also you see the possibility of the work being performed, existing as a collaborative text, but having this kind of future life, this afterlife, this ongoing life. You're saying, you know, that the performance, it can be viewed on people's, you know, Simon performing can be viewed on our Alastair rather, sorry, can be seen performing in our handheld devices by the window. He could guide us through the text if we wanted to stand on the street and look at it. We can look at it at home on our laptop. It could be on a monitor in an exhibition in the future. So there's this sort of sense of this sort of propositional exhibition in a way, where these other strands are all there, or somebody else could perform the texts or read them or have a different manifestation. I mean, do you see it as having this kind of ongoing afterlife beyond the book, beyond into the future?
Yeah. I mean, for me, this has always been the first manifestation, and already it's become so multifaceted and so many platforms. But I do think that it's just the beginning, because I like the idea that, you know, like we could, like you mentioned, we could have the video shown in different ways. We can have different people performing the work. I'm very interested in that, different interpretation of the text. So it will generate more and more versions in a way. Also the idea of just recording or showing just the sound of someone performing the work without necessarily the image. You know, there's like something to be said and to be gained from all the different iteration of the project. And I think it's quite interesting how it can give different things in different shapes and formats, you know. It was also interesting for me, you were talking about trust, you know, that the artists have to put in me, because of course they've been giving me their work and their text, sometimes very personal, what I was going to do with it. And, you know, it was interesting for me to, you know, find a way to organize all the text together and what kind of order and system I was going to go for. And I really kind of engage with the quality of the text themselves, because, you know, there are so many, there's such variety. And that's why, in a way, you know, it starts in a quite poetic way, then it goes into a more kind of frenetic rhythm and more confrontational. And then there's a few kind of moments of storytelling, and then it goes back into, again, a kind of quite poetic way. And it was interesting when we were talking the other day, I suddenly thought, oh, it's a bit like the visualization of a sound wave, you know, of something that goes up and down. Which actually I just realized we've been looking at so many graphics of infection rates going up and down. So maybe that's something else that's come to mind. But anyway, so, you know, it's really interesting how the different aspects of this project are sort of, you know, growing as well. And you know, when Ingrid at Pia suggested, let's do something with the window, it was just serendipitous somehow. It was just perfect moment in time. And I love the fact, because I thought about doing something with vinyl text in a gallery walls in the future again. But I love the fact that the window is this space between inside and outside, which has become such a major thing for us at the moment. You know, we can't be together inside, and often we can't even be together outside, but you know, that is the threshold. So it just couldn't be more appropriate.
I was talking also, of course, this conversation is a threshold. It's another aspect of the exhibition. And I'm aware of the fact that time is moving on as well within our conversation. So if anybody has any questions to ask, please do put in the Q&A box, and I'll be keeping a beady eye as to what's going on, because I think questions and answers and discourse is part of the project. As Marysia said, you know, our conversation is part of this project, and indeed your questions out there are part of the project, and we are the sort of the window within this, the membrane. But I just wanted to ask, while hopefully people are thinking of their questions, to put in the Q&A box, which I'll be looking at. Simon, you know, I wanted to ask about Alastair's performance. I mean, that in itself is quite intimate. I mean, yes, he's an actor. Yes, he's performing the piece, but he's doing it on his iPhone, in his own space. There's not a camera crew behind him filming it all. It seemed important, I would imagine, to keep that sort of spirit, that sort of intimacy, that performative intimacy, if you like, in the actual performance itself.
Yeah, and I mean, there's two aspects of this. One, I quite like the also lo-fi element of the project, especially in its conception, you know, the fact that you can also do something quite meaningful and explore new ways of doing things without really having to have a big budget for it. But also I really liked, you know, it was very much intentional. I always imagined that the first performance that was going to be broadcast online was going to have to be recorded on either a phone or a computer camera, because again, it's very much the language and the aesthetic of what we're going through in this moment in time. So it seemed really appropriate. But also that sense of the intimacy that you just mentioned, the fact that he's just, yeah, done it in his house with his own phone and then send me the file. And also, you know, the other aspect of this, which was really important to me, is that it was one take. Because I didn't want to do something that was going to be overly edited or contrived or kind of aim for some kind of idealized perfection. And I wanted to really have the quality again of real life. And, you know, it was quite a challenge for him to do one take, 38 minutes, you know, 52 texts. And they're all so different and varied. I mean, in a way, it's a fantastic challenge for an actor as well. And that's what he said. He really enjoyed the challenge of it. And I think also in this moment in time with the lockdown, I think he really enjoyed having a challenge like that, you know, while theaters are closed. And
nice to get a gig. Nice to get a gig under lockdown.
So, and yeah, so in a way, and it's going to be interesting to see him doing it again, hopefully live when we do the book launch, but also other versions in the future. I also like the fact that, you know, a small group of people on a beach, someone reading it out loud, the text come alive, you know? It's like, there's so many different possibilities to this. And the other thing that is great is that also in its different manifestation, whatever is the video, the book, or the window in this moment, we're also reaching different audiences.
Yeah. And the audiences, I mean, on the street in Hoxton, which is so much part of what Pia does. It's so much part of Pia's ethos, this idea of having this membrane between, very permeable membrane between the gallery and the street and the people who live around and work around Hoxton, as well as the art crowd and the international art crowd beyond. So there's a sense very much of all these different kinds of audiences coming and going.
Well, it's only interesting also what Marysia was saying about the relationship between the kind of intimate and the public. You know, it's also been interesting how I initially invited also artists that I've worked with many times before, which are also good friends, but then I extended to people I didn't know so well, also to whatever they were friends or not, or new friends, people in other sides of the world. And it's kind of interesting also this idea of, yeah, of creating different community in a way, you know.
I had a question, Simon, about the title. And you may have said something about it at the beginning, but like the first lockdown, but don't quite remember where it comes from.
Yeah, no, basically the title comes from a previous series of works of mine, which is, it's a series of text works based on misreadings, so Freudian slips. And I showed one at the Freud Museum because I did a series of neons with some of these, but I also started this archive of misreadings. I seem to do it fairly regularly, so it's quite productive. And so Crocodile Cradle was one of them. And I would just, I've got a list of titles for potential exhibition, list of misreadings. I was just looking at various things that could be fitting because I had to obviously find a title to contain and name this. And then I realized there were kind of elements of it which seemed appropriate, like, of course, the crocodile is something menacing. So I was thinking about that. Also, I was thinking about cat cradle. Cradle is like a game where, you also have this network of lines. So it's like a kind of connecting things. Also something quite playful, but menacing. And the other thing that totally clinched it is that I went on Instagram and I just looked up #Crocodile Cradle, and totally crazy coincidence. There's a company that makes one of those kind of little stands for your phone so that you can do what we're doing now using your phone, which is called Crocodile Cradle because it looks like the jaw of a crocodile. So I just thought, okay, this is meant to be. So that's the title.
And it's fantastically memorable too. I love the fact it plays all these Freudian slips. And I thought immediately of the cat's cradle, the interconnection of lines, but also perhaps, snapping crocodile's jaws that could sever those lines. There's a sort of, it's a very vibrant image in the true sort of sense of Freudian surrealism.
And the other thing that is interesting is that, of course, is the title of the overall work, but in a way is also my contribution in the collective script because it's the first page of the book. It's the first moment of the script. And it's also interesting because I think you will see it even more with the book, but I like this kind of avalanche effect or snowball effect, where obviously my work, which already came from somewhere else, became a sort of way of igniting all of this,
Yeah. And I mean, Ingrid, I can see you're here with us now again, which is great. I mean, from your point of view, from Pierre, it shape-shifted a lot. I mean, it was testament also to your nimbleness running your organization that you could make it, you could accommodate these changing forms and make it happen under lockdown in this different way. A one-off book, it's come quite a long way since it was a one-off performance to launch a possible book.
Yeah, no, I think I suffer a certain anxiety about not giving something back to the street because we are so public. We're next to the post office. And in the last year, there's been this very long, consistent queue outside the post office. And I think just to have the blinds down and a blank canvas on the street, it seems so against what the fundamental ethos of the organization is. So in the first lockdown, which as we know is like approaching the anniversary now, everyone was in a kind of a state of panic, but within a few weeks we were developing an idea of what we can do with the window. And and it wasn't an artwork, it was a graphic that I devised, and then I got Fraser Muggeridge to do the sort of the layout, but it was very, very simple, using this ubiquitous rainbow image, but much enlarged and fragmented across the whole of the 10 meters, but also using the bit of Caliban's speech from The Tempest about Brave New World, which seemed to give a really positive message at a moment when it seemed very, very necessary to have a positive message. So, and it's been fantastic. So in a way, it's always it's in the back of my mind to try and keep that space as active as possible. And when we worked with Savinda Boal for the last project, we configured her project in such a way so it could be viewed from outside. And so when the third lockdown was looming for us, it was just an instantaneous reaction as, come on, Simon, let's do it. Let's put it on the window. It's like the transparent membrane between the world and the gallery. And it's something that so many artists, like Jimmy, has dealt with that in such an interesting way. And it's so fundamental to the way that we work. So I hope that it will spawn yet further ways of working like that. It's very, to me, it's very exciting.
Or maybe
and also different, like, you know, I think the job that Kirsty's done is so elegant, and yeah, it's such a beautiful job. So it's a fantastically rich, multifaceted, multi-layered collaboration. There's lots of individual voices which are being orchestrated by Simon, invited by Simon. I mean, I can think of like musical analogies of an orchestra with different instruments and the conductor and the, you know, and the composer. And it's very, very rich in that way, I think.
I mean, Alice St. Pierre's made the observation that audiences spend a great deal of time, not only when they're queuing for the post office with the piece on the street, is a way to be able to engage with artworks. And she's also asking, you know, do you have any idea about how the next iteration might play out, Simon? I know the book's still got to come. You've still got to launch the book, but have you got any thoughts about the next iteration at all?
Well, not really. We've just been so busy doing this in the book and everything, and there's been actually such a great response that it's been occupying a lot of my time. But for the future, I just love the idea that, you know, I might start conversation with other places where they might want to show the video, do the performance live with or without the book. Or I also very much like the idea of using the sound, like I mentioned earlier, and just have a sound installation, for example, you know.
That would be interesting.
Simon, you remember we talked on the phone a while back, and I was suggesting that maybe you could get each participant to read their own text, so we have the voice as well of each artist.
Yeah, I think that should be a collaboration with you. Marysia.
As long as Kirsty and Ingrid and Jimmy can be involved, that's okay.
Yeah. And I wanted to ask Jimmy, actually, also how you felt about someone else reading your text. And
yeah, I mean, last time we mentioned it a little bit, and to me, it was a very interesting experience, because obviously I had an idea of like how to read it. When you write it, you always kind of sometimes, you know, sound it for yourself, and it was very different because he has a different accent and he has a different intonation, and so it was a particular experience, but it was not an unpleasant one. It was kind of, okay, this is existing differently. And so we kind of, I've also collaborated with the singer who has sung this text. So I know it also was a song. So it's I am very much into this transformation and this passing on of the text and it having different forms, just like an object. So that was, you know, to me, that's also why the project was appealing, in a sense, to kind of delegate it, kind of let it go and then see what happens. But I was having some thoughts about what Ingrid said earlier about the public, and also, you know, like the current policies about like keeping institutions closed, and how, you know, somehow, you know, kind of qualifying institutions as, you know, personal entertainment, when you suddenly, you know, have this opportunity to create a public space despite the absence of publicness, or despite the absence of things being open, just kind of shows very well that there is a public and it's not only for personal entertainment. And so I think that was a very, if anything, that is also a very, very important thing that this exhibition is doing. It's like people are still working, people are trying to work, and showing that how important it is that these places need to reopen.
I think that's a fantastic clarion call on which to probably end up our conversation. Listen, was all questions popped into the box. That's exciting. Jess Fernie, she'd like to hear Marysia read Jimmy's text, or vice versa, now or at some time in the future. I'm not sure we can do it right now, Jez, because I think we're kind of coming to the end. But
In the future.
Yeah, I'm up for it.
message from Jez. Jez, if anybody wants to. I think your idea was great, Marysia, about having everybody reading their own texts and hearing their voices, and then also having Alastair's voice as well. So you've got these kind of different. It gives a sense of the richness and the the way in which the project is so able to shapeshift and continue to shapeshift.
It's funny, actually, just as one last thing to say, when I was talking to Alastair and I was giving him instructions about how to perform the work, I wanted to be something quite deadpan because I wanted the text to be the protagonist. And he kind of jokingly, but he kind of said, oh, do you want to make it into an opera?
Oh my God.
So why not? Watch this space, who knows?
That's wonderful. You talked about sound. Ingrid, you mentioned various instruments tuning up. There's a whole...
Well, something we haven't really talked about is the fantastic function of the QR code, which is it's something that Savinda used to fantastic effect for her exhibition, which was over the sort of winter months. But of course, there is the QR code, which is completely integral to the design. And you can go, if you're walking past, you can click on the QR code and watch Alastair Mackenzie's performance as well. So that is a very key element, really. Yes.
We've got another question just come in now. Of course, now whenever I start making winding up noises, of course, that's when all the questions always come in. It's like whenever I finish an interview, everyone then always says what they really wanted to say. An anonymous attendee says, could you speak about contributions or contributors who have included remixed or reworked text from other authors? I mean, that is interesting, isn't it? I mean, we had various people have used other voices, other people. Liam Gillick did, Tacita Dean did. Interesting, their choices. Simon,
are you asking me? Well, I'm very interested in appropriation, and I've worked with appropriation for a long time, so it's something I'm very kind of used to, and again, I can relate to. I mean, I wanted to be as free as possible. One of the only limitation I gave people was 200 words max. Again, just for practicality, I had to find a way to kind of, make it work. But so, I mean, I think it's interesting. I mean, actually, one thing I've got to say, it's quite interesting how Liam Gillick is also kind of one anchor after me of the text, and Jonathan Monk is the kind of end. And he's quoting Daniel Defoe, and it's a quote from the past, which I thought was interesting. And then Jonathan Monk is some kind of proposition about the future. So that was an interesting way of kind of relating to original texts and appropriated texts. But I don't know. I mean, for me, it's a very normal way of working. So I don't really.
I mean, I think one interesting way to think about appropriation in this context is it is, echoing something which has so much resonance across generations and across cultures. In a funny sort of a way, you could even say that Christian Marclay is appropriated text, but it's text from a comic, and it's that, and it has so much power, and it is incredibly. And sometimes less is a lot more. And I think Tacita's choice is extremely perfect. For
two lines from Andrew Marvell, which just
it's
volumes.
It speaks volumes. And so I think I think appropriate. It is a tribute. They are tributes as well as, and it says a lot about the artist who selected them, as well as a tribute to a great piece of writing or a thought or that has so much importance and resonance at this moment. I mean, a lot of artists, as Simon says, a lot of artists appropriate other artists or writers' texts, and it's all part of that rich history in a way.
And the power of language. I mean, just an absolute testament to the power of language in all its senses: visual, oral, political, poetic. artistic. I mean, I think that's the richness, just of a very particular kind of means of expression.
But also from a design perspective, both on the window and in the book, those authors are given the equal, they're bracketed with the artist's name, whereas you can easily as a designer just put, I don't know, a small credit somewhere. So you realize the power of design and interpretation of a sort of co-author in a way. They're reappropriating text, and you as a designer need to make that obvious.
Also, it's obviously, it's my work, but it's a collaborative work with many voices and many authors. So it's also interesting, it's sort of, I feel, contextualize what I do in this work and in other works to also have artists appropriating other artists.
Yeah.
And also in a sense, I mean, you're appropriating them. You say it's my work. So it could say Andrew Marvell, Tacita Dean, Simon Moretti, and it's all three of you.
Well, that's it, yeah.
And indeed Kirsty Carter as well, because
exactly, and yes,
and indeed Pierre, because
exactly. So I like the idea of the lines of where something becomes appropriated and not. I mean, in this you can take this further. Like if an image of a performance is taken by a photographer, is the image of the performance the work of the performer or of the photographer, or is it a collaboration? Or authorship is such an interesting and difficult subject, and I think Simon's approach is very free and easy. I mean, you appropriate other artists' work, not just what they say, but your curatorial practice is also in a sense about appropriation, of reauthoring of other existing works. To a certain extent, a lot of curators do that, which is sometimes why the curator's name is sometimes headlined before the list of artists that are involved in the project. So that's another whole other conversation.
That's a whole other ball game. Marysia, you want to
exactly.
say something? Sorry.
Yeah, I was just wondering whether it's something other than appropriation, because I think it's kind of far beyond appropriation. It's something about kind of acknowledging the diversity of a cultural moment where, so I think what Simon did was enabled attention and brought attention to certain expressions. And I think, I'm sort of less worried about whether he appropriated. I think what speaks to me is that he also encourages other people to take anything they need in order to say something. So whether it's other people's texts or other people's images, as long as it's acknowledged as being someone else's. And I think that way of working, which, something I feel very close to, which makes the Creative Commons.
I've just got a question, a provocative question from an anonymous attendee, which is, does anyone have a favorite piece? That's a slight spinball, I think, here.
I can't answer that question, but everybody else can.
I love the musical note.
Yeah, which actually it's a pose.
It's a pose.
Yeah, it's a pose. Yeah, John Amlader's contribution, and I just saw it was absolute genius, because of course we all had this forced pose. So what he sent me was a pose, I mean, also, he's very interested in John Cage, very influenced by him. He uses musical instrument in his work. So it makes sense for so many reasons. But yeah, I mean, the variety, it's been amazing. And the response has been incredible. So, I couldn't wish for more, really.
Looking forward to the book.
Yeah. I think a wonderful moment on which to end is on John Amlader's pause, on the fact that it is a moment for pause. And we've had a fantastic conversation. Thank you all very, very much. And we're pressing pause, but we're going to be pressing play into the future with the publication of the book, the live event. Keep check Pia's website. We'll be keeping you up to date and informed about all this. Ingrid, I'm going to hand over to you for the last fond farewell. Just anything else from a Pia point of view that you want to flag up at this point?
Yeah, we haven't got a date set for the book launch, but watch this space. It will be going off to print relatively soon. And I should also say there is a kind of synchronicity here, because Pia's working on another book at the moment, which is also about different languages and voices, which is a kind of poetry map of Hackney with 100 poems by 100 different poets representing all the languages spoken across the borough. And that's a project that's that the poet and translator Stephen Watts is selecting the poems, and it's part of our Swirl of Words project, and it's very, very exciting. And so have a look on the website for that. And it's that book, which is being designed by Joe Hales, is going to be coming out relatively soon, probably before Simon's maybe. Anyway, have a look on the website about that. And I think they're both really fantastic projects, but it's been wonderful talking to everybody, and thanks so much for everyone coming along tonight. And thank you, Louisa, for guiding us through and all these wonderful conversations and insights. And thanks to all of the panelists for their really fantastic contribution. And thanks to all the attendees.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Goodbye. Bye-bye.